The history books won't tell you about the night a ruthless immortal broke his own soul for a mortal woman. They won't tell you how the bitter burn of nightshade on her tongue felt like the sweetest freedom, or the terrifying bloody lengths the king went to drag her back. Before the monsters dragged her into the shadows, Beatrice Kensington was breathtakingly, wonderfully ordinary. She was 28, lived in a slightly damp duplex in South Portland, Maine, and managed the inventory at Arthur Pendleton's independent bookstore downtown. Beatrice was not the waifish, trembling heroine of a Gothic romance. She was a fat woman, soft-bellied, thick-thighed, with a warm, round face that easily flushed pink when she laughed. She was comfortable in her skin, grounded in the quiet reality of her everyday life. That reality shattered on a freezing November evening when Nathaniel Cross walked into the bookstore. Nathaniel was the king of the Northern Covens, a vampire whose lineage predated the founding of the colonies. To the hidden blood-drinking elite of the modern world, he was a god made of ice and cruelty. Vampires were creatures of sharp angles, starved perfection, and cold marble. They were terrifyingly beautiful, trapped in an endless cycle of predatory vanity. But Nathaniel didn't want cold marble. The moment his pitch-black eyes locked onto Beatrice as she hauled a heavy box of hardcovers behind the register, a twisted, ancient obsession took root in his dead chest. She was life personified, radiant, heavy, warm, and entirely human. Within a week, the duplex was found empty. Arthur Pendleton reported her missing to the local authorities, but the police file was quietly buried by the corrupt hands that Nathaniel kept on his payroll. Beatrice awoke in a sprawling, impenetrable modern fortress, hidden deep in the dense pine-choked forests of the Allagash. For 3 years, Beatrice was Nathaniel's captive, his prize, and his favorite victim. But to maintain his absolute, terrifying authority over the vicious vampire court, Nathaniel could never show genuine affection. Any display of love was a weakness that the Covens would exploit to overthrow him. So he buried his obsession beneath layers of devastating cruelty. He made her life a psychological hell. During the lavish, sickening banquets held in the manor's grand hall, Nathaniel would force Beatrice to sit at his feet. The court members, slender, vicious creatures like Lady Victoria and Lord William, would openly sneer at her. They expected the king's blood bride to be an ethereal, fragile beauty. Instead, they saw Beatrice. "Look at her," Victoria would hiss, sipping from a crystal flute of crimson. "She is a cumbersome, grotesque thing. Why do you keep such a heavy, ungainly pet? My king, does she not disgust you?" Nathaniel's face would remain an unreadable mask of stone. He would reach down his freezing fingers, gripping Beatrice's soft jaw tightly enough to bruise, tilting her face up. "She is cattle Victoria." Nathaniel would drawl loudly, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, ensuring every immortal heard his mocking tone. "Her blood is sweet enough, but look at her. Look at this pathetic, unsightly human softness. She is a gluttonous creature entirely beneath us. I keep her only because a king requires an abundance of sustenance, and she provides a plentiful supply." The court would erupt into cruel, ringing laughter. Beatrice would sit there, her heart hammering against her ribs, staring blankly ahead. She learned to detach to stare at the expensive imported Persian rug beneath her knees, focusing on the intricate woven patterns while the monsters ridiculed her body, her humanity, her very existence. Yet the moment the heavy oak doors of his private chambers clicked shut, the monster transformed. The cruel, mocking king vanished. In the dark, Nathaniel was a desperately possessive creature. He would bury his face in her soft stomach, his cold hands worshipping the very curves he had just publicly degraded. He would murmur desperate, fractured praises against her skin, drinking from her neck with a gentleness that contradicted the brutal bruises he had left on her jaw hours before. "You are mine," he would whisper in the pitch-black room, his voice trembling with a terrifying reverence. "Only mine, Beatrice. They do not understand. You are the only real thing in this rotting world. But Beatrice was not a doll. She was a woman of profound pride and resilience, and Nathaniel's dual nature, the public humiliation and the private, suffocating obsession, was eroding her sanity. She hated him. She hated the way he thought he could break her spirit in the dining hall and mend it in the bedroom. She hated the golden cage, the silk dresses he forced over her curves, and the constant lingering ache of his fangs in her throat. She realized with cold, sobering clarity that Nathaniel Cross would never let her go. He would keep her locked in this main fortress until she grew old, and then he would likely turn her into the very thing she despised, freezing her in time as his eternal plaything. Beatrice decided she would rather rot in the earth than spend another night in his arms. She was going to escape the only way a mortal could. Beatrice's salvation didn't come in the form of a knight in shining armor, but rather a terrified, overworked human servant named Martha Higgins. Martha was a local woman from Caribou, deeply in debt, and forced into indentured servitude at the estate to pay off medical bills for her ailing husband. She was the one who scrubbed the blood from the carpets and pressed the king's suits. Over the course of 6 months, Beatrice quietly befriended Martha. It started with whispered conversations in the sprawling kitchen while the vampires slept away the daylight. Beatrice listened to Martha cry about her husband, and in return, Martha looked at Beatrice not as a vampire's pet, but as a hostage slowly dying of a broken heart. "I need out, Martha," Beatrice whispered one rainy Tuesday afternoon, sitting at the butcher block island. "He is going to turn me soon. I can feel it. He looks at me like he's running out of time. If he makes me one of them, my soul is gone." Martha, wiping down the marble counters with trembling hands, shook her head. "There are guards at every gate, Bea. The woods are filled with wolves that answer to him. You wouldn't make it a mile." "I don't plan on walking out," Beatrice replied, her voice steady, devoid of any tremble. Her brown eyes met Martha's wide, terrified gaze. "I need you to go into his private greenhouse. I need the concentrated digitalis from the foxglove and the crushed root of belladonna. Bring it to me." Martha gasped, dropping her rag. "Bea, no, that will stop your heart. It will kill you in agony." "It will give me peace," Beatrice corrected. "And it will poison him if he tries to drink from me while I die. It is the only way." It took 3 weeks of begging, but Martha finally broke. On a dreary evening in early April, while the estate was consumed by the preparations for the vernal equinox gathering, Martha slipped a small amber glass vial into Beatrice's apron pocket. The liquid inside was thick and dark. "May God forgive me." Martha choked out tears streaming down her face before she hurried away down the servants' corridor. Beatrice returned to her luxurious gilded prison on the top floor. The room was oppressively beautiful, heavy velvet drapes, a massive 4-poster bed, and a roaring fireplace that did nothing to chase the chill from her bones. She dressed herself carefully, putting on her favorite oversized, worn-out cotton nightgown. She didn't want to die in the expensive silk lingerie Nathaniel had bought for her. She wanted to die as Beatrice Kensington from South Portland. She poured herself a cup of Twining's Earl Grey tea, watching the steam curl into the cold air. Without a second thought, without a trembling hand, she uncorked the amber vial and emptied the deadly cocktail into the cup. She swirled it once with a silver spoon. She walked over to the massive window, looking out at the endless expanse of dark pine trees swaying in the Maine wind. "I win Nathaniel," she thought. Beatrice brought the cup to her lips and drank. The taste was intensely bitter, coating her tongue like metallic ash, but she forced every last drop down her throat. For a few minutes there was nothing, just the sound of the wind rattling the reinforced glass. Then the belladonna took hold. It started as a terrifying, violent flush of heat. Her skin, usually warm, felt as if it were pressed against an open flame. Her vision blurred the edges of the room, warping and twisting into grotesque shadows. Her heart, overstimulated by the digitalis, began to hammer, a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs, a chaotic drumbeat of impending death. She collapsed onto the thick Persian rug, her heavy body hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her lungs seized, desperately clawing for air that refused to come. The pain was absolute, tearing through her nervous system like shattered glass. A dry, agonizing sob ripped from her throat as she curled in on herself, clutching her stomach. Suddenly the heavy oak doors were violently thrown open. The wood splintered against the stone wall. Nathaniel stood in the doorway. He had been downstairs surrounded by his sycophantic court, but a vampire of his age was intimately tethered to the heartbeat of his bloodmate. He had felt the erratic, fatal stutter of her pulse from 3 floors down. When his pitch-black eyes landed on her writhing form on the rug, the untouchable, cruel king of the north vanished. The mask of stone shattered entirely. Beatrice, his voice was a raw, guttural roar of sheer panic that no member of his court had ever heard. He crossed the room in a fraction of a second, dropping to his knees, so hard the floorboards groaned. He gathered her heavy, convulsing body into his arms, ignoring the way she weakly tried to push him away. "No, no, no!" He chanted his hands frantically, feeling her burning skin, his eyes wide with a terror that made him look suddenly pathetically human. "What have you done? Beatrice, look at me." Her head lolled back against his arm. Her pupils were blown wide, completely swallowing the brown of her irises. She looked up at him, a bloody, bitter smile curving her lips as she gasped for air. "I'm leaving you." She choked out her voice, barely a whisper, over the roaring in her own ears. "You can't keep me. I will heal you." He snarled, though his hands were shaking violently. He brought his own wrist to his mouth, his fangs tearing through his pale flesh, welling with thick, immortal blood. He forced his bleeding wrist against her lips. Drink it, damn you!" The vampiric blood slid past her lips, but as it met the lethal concentration of nightshade and foxglove in her system, a violent chemical reaction occurred. The dark magic of his blood rejected the toxic botany. Beatrice gagged violently, coughing up a mixture of his blood and dark bile, staining his immaculate white shirt. Where her vomit touched his skin, the poison burned him like acid. Nathaniel hissed, pulling back instinctively as his skin blistered and smoked. "Wolfsbane," he whispered in horror, smelling the hidden ingredient Martha had added to ensure the poison's finality. "You ingested wolfsbane." Beatrice's breathing grew incredibly shallow. The frantic beating of her heart slowed to a horrific, agonizing crawl. "Thump! Thump! Let me go," she whispered, a tear slipping down her flushed cheek. "I hate you. I die. Hating you. You do not get to leave me." Nathaniel screamed, his voice cracking, tearing through the silent manor like a physical weapon. He crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her hair, as she took one final, rattling breath. Her heavy, warm body went completely limp in his arms. The heart that had anchored Nathaniel to the world for 3 years finally permanently stopped. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the sound of the vampire king sobbing over the body of the mortal woman he had driven to her death. But as he stared at her lifeless face, the despair in his eyes hardened into something entirely unspeakable. He laid her gently onto the floor and stood up. If nature and biology had claimed her, then he would rip apart the very fabric of existence to get her back, even if it meant tearing his own immortal soul in half. The heavy silence of the manor was absolute, save for the frantic, dripping sound of Nathaniel's blood pooling on the Persian rug. He held Beatrice's lifeless body, his mind, violently rejecting the reality of her cold skin. A vampire's grief is a catastrophic event. It does not mourn, it destroys. But Nathaniel could not destroy the world. He had to rewrite its rules. Bypassing the treacherous court upstairs, Nathaniel carried Beatrice deep into the subterranean labyrinth beneath the main estate. Beyond the wine cellars and the archaic torture chambers, lay a cavernous grotto of damp limestone. This was the domain of Ezekiel Crane, an ancient blood witch whose existence was erased from modern occult history. Crane was an outcast from the Salem trials, a man who had traded his eyesight for the ability to weave the threads of life and death hiding in Nathaniel's catacombs for over 3 centuries. Nathaniel kicked the heavy iron door open, the sound echoing like thunder. Crane sat by a fire of blue, smokeless flames, his milky white eyes turning toward the intrusion. "I told you, King," Crane rasped, smelling the metallic tang of death and wolfsbane. "You cannot turn a vessel that is already shattered. The nightshade has scorched her veins. Vampirism requires a dying pulse, not a dead one. I do not want her turned." Nathaniel growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying raw desperation. He laid Beatrice's heavy soft form onto a sprawling slab of obsidian in the center of the cavern. He smoothed her matted hair away from her pale face, his cold fingers lingering on her cheek. "If she wakes as a vampire, she will never forgive me. She despises what I am. She must wake as she is, human, warm, alive." Crane laughed, a dry, dusty sound. "You ask for resurrection, Nathaniel, a true revival of the mortal flesh. The universe demands an equal exchange. To restart a human heart, you must feed it a life force so potent it overrides death. You must give her your soul." "Take it," Nathaniel answered instantly without a fraction of hesitation. "You do not understand the cost," Crane warned, standing up and leaning heavily on a wooden staff. "Vampires are immortal, because our souls are locked in stasis. If I cleave yours in half and plant it in her chest, you will lose your invulnerability. You will feel pain, you will age. You will become a fragile, broken thing tethered to her lifespan. And she will carry the weight of your darkest essence." I said, "Take it." The ritual was an abomination, against nature, a violent tearing of the metaphysical fabric. Crane instructed Nathaniel to kneel beside the obsidian slab. The witch drew complex, jagged sigils across Nathaniel's bare chest with a paste made from crushed bone and ash. Then Crane handed Nathaniel a ceremonial dagger, a terrifying blade forged from meteorite iron, older than the Roman Empire. "You must cut the tether yourself," Crane whispered, his sightless eyes wide with fearful awe. "Think of her. Only her." Nathaniel looked at Beatrice's serene, lifeless face. She was beautiful in her heavy, profound humanity. He remembered the soft curve of her belly, the warmth of her thighs, the way she smelled of vanilla and old paper from Arthur Pendleton's bookstore. He remembered the brutal, suffocating guilt he felt every time he had mocked her in the great hall to protect her from his enemies. With a guttural roar, Nathaniel plunged the iron dagger directly into his own chest. Vampires do not feel physical pain the way mortals do, but this was a spiritual vivisection. A blinding, agonizing eruption of pure, blinding, white agony exploded behind his eyes. He carved through his own sternum, reaching blindly into the hollow cavity of his immortal chest. He wasn't extracting a physical organ, but rather the glowing, dark violet nexus of his immortal life force. He pulled it out. The cavern shook violently, dust raining from the limestone ceiling. Nathaniel's flawless porcelain skin instantly began to dull. The absolute black of his eyes fractured, revealing rings of exhausted human hazel. He fell forward, his trembling, blood-soaked hand pressing the glowing violet essence directly over Beatrice's heart. Crane chanted, in a forgotten guttural language, slamming his staff against the stone floor. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The essence sank into Beatrice's nightgown, disappearing into her chest. For 10 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Nathaniel collapsed against the obsidian slab, gasping for air, a sensation he had not experienced in 400 years. He was cold. He was weak. Then a sound pierced the cavern. Thump. It was heavy, unsteady, but it was there. Thump, 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 thump. Beatrice's chest rose violently. She gasped a ragged, desperate inhalation of damp cavern air, and her brown eyes snapped open. Beatrice did not wake up screaming. She woke up drowning in an ocean of unfamiliar, overwhelming emotion. As she sat up, clutching her heavy chest, she expected to feel the agonizing burn of the belladonna. Instead, she felt a strange, intoxicating hum of power vibrating through her veins. And more terrifyingly, she felt him. She looked down and saw Nathaniel collapsed on the floor. He looked entirely different. His aristocratic, terrifying aura was gone. His dark hair was suddenly threaded with streaks of silver. He looked pale, sickly, and profoundly exhausted. But it wasn't his appearance that shocked her. It was the sudden, undeniable telepathic flood washing into her mind. Because she now harbored half of his ancient soul, Beatrice could feel everything Nathaniel was feeling. For 3 years, she had believed his cruelty was his true nature, and his private moments of tenderness were just a twisted form of manipulation. Now the truth slammed into her with the force of a freight train. She felt his suffocating, desperate love for her. She felt the agonizing, tearing pain he had endured to keep her safe from the vicious vampires upstairs. She felt his self-hatred, his absolute terror of losing her, and his desperate prayer that she would simply live even if she hated him. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice cracking. He looked up at her, his hazel eyes swimming with unshed tears. "You're alive," he choked out, his voice hoarse and weak. "You're alive, my beautiful, perfect girl." Before Beatrice could process the monumental weight of his sacrifice, the heavy iron door of the grotto was blown off its hinges. Standing in the entryway, flanked by 4 massive, snarling, dire wolves and 3 heavily armed immortal guards, was Lady Victoria. Her lips were curled into a vicious, triumphant sneer. Beside her stood Lord William, his eyes glowing with predatory malice. "I knew it!" Victoria hissed, stepping into the cavern, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. "We felt the king's power plummet. We felt the ancient wardings on the estate fracture. You gave up your immortality for this bloated, pathetic cow." Nathaniel tried to stand, trying to place himself between Beatrice and the usurpers, but his weakened legs buckled beneath him. He crashed to his knees, coughing up dark, human-like blood. "Kill the king," Victoria ordered her guards, her eyes flashing with ambition, "and tear the human to unrecognizable shreds. The northern covens are mine now." The wolves snarled, their massive jaws snapping as they lunged forward. But they did not reach Beatrice. A sudden, overwhelming wave of dark authority exploded from Beatrice's chest. It wasn't magic she had to learn. It was an instinct written into the half of the vampire king's soul that now beat within her mortal heart. She was fully human, her body still soft and heavy, but her spirit was now forged of ancient, terrifying iron. "Kneel," Beatrice's voice did not echo. It commanded the very air in the room to freeze. The sound carried the metaphysical weight of a 400-year-old monarch. The dire wolves whimpered their momentum, entirely crushed by the sheer spiritual pressure radiating from the human woman. They hit the stone floor, tucking their tails, pressing their snouts into the dirt, in absolute submission to their true master. Victoria froze, her smug expression dissolving into sheer terror as she felt the psychic, crushing weight of the king's aura. But it was coming from Beatrice. "What? What is this?" Lord William stammered, stepping back, his fangs retracting in fear. Beatrice stepped off the obsidian slab. She walked past Nathaniel, standing barefoot on the cold stone, her oversized nightgown billowing slightly. She locked eyes with Victoria, and through the soul connection, Beatrice tapped into Nathaniel's ancient power. "She is a threat," Nathaniel's mind whispered into hers, his protective rage fueling her. "You called me a pathetic pet," Beatrice said softly, her brown eyes flashing with a sudden, violent violet hue. "You mocked my body. You mocked my humanity. But right now, Victoria, I hold the leash to every monster in this forest." Beatrice didn't raise a hand. She simply looked at the cowering wolves and projected a single undeniable command into their minds: tear them apart. The wolves turned on Victoria and William with terrifying, blinding speed. The cavern erupted into the horrifying sounds of tearing flesh and immortal screams as the usurpers were dragged screaming into the dark corridors by the massive beasts. The remaining guards dropped their weapons and fled in terror, realizing that the human they had tormented was now the apex predator of the northern covens. Silence descended on the grotto once more. Beatrice turned back to Nathaniel. He was still on his knees looking up at her, not as a king looking at a captive, but as a devoted worshipper looking at a goddess. "You saved me," Nathaniel whispered, a broken smile touching his lips. Beatrice walked over and knelt in front of him. She reached out her warm, soft hands, cupping his cold, aging face. She could feel his heartbeat now a mirror to her own. Thump, thump. "I feel it, Nathaniel," she said softly, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "I feel how much you love me. I feel the guilt. I feel everything you hid from me." "Then stay," he begged, leaning into her warm palms, his eyes pleading. "Rule them. Rule me. I am nothing without you." Beatrice leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It was a kiss of profound, tragic understanding. It tasted of salt ash and absolute devotion. For a fleeting moment, the years of abuse, the cruelty, and the imprisonment faded into the background of this singular, monumental sacrifice, but Beatrice slowly pulled away. She stood up, her bare feet planted firmly on the ground. "You gave me your soul, Nathaniel. You gave me my life back," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "And because I have your soul inside me, I know that you finally understand why I cannot stay." Nathaniel's breath hitched. Through their shared tether, he felt her overwhelming need for freedom, a need as essential to her as oxygen. He felt her longing to see the ocean, to read books without a guard watching her, to just be a normal, heavy, beautiful, human woman in the sun. And because he loved her, truly loved her enough to rip himself apart, he nodded. "Go," he whispered, a single tear falling down his cheek. "Take the wolves. They will escort you out of the woods. The wealth in the vault is yours. My life is yours." "I will never forget you," Beatrice said quietly. She turned and walked out of the grotto, leaving the broken king in the shadows. 3 years later, in the rainy coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, Beatrice Kensington opened her own independent bookstore. She was still delightfully soft, still prone to blushing when she laughed, and entirely free. She had a cat, a small house overlooking the sea, and a quiet, beautiful life. But late at night, when the coastal winds howled and the house was perfectly still, she would place a hand over her chest. Beneath the soft curve of her breast, her heart beat a steady, strong rhythm. And hundreds of miles away, in a dark, empty manor in Maine, a greying, weakened immortal sat by a window pressing his own hand to his chest, feeling the exact same rhythm. They were worlds apart, forever separated by the trauma of their past, but bound eternally by a single shared soul. If this dark journey of love, betrayal, and survival captivated you, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to support our channel and share this tale with your fellow dark romance lovers. What would you do if you were in Beatrice's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling, twisted romance. Until next time, stay safe in the shadows.